Well, George, since you brought up Dresden, I think that's such a significant city to Bach, even though he spent most of the second half of his life in Leipzig, and he wrote the Mass here, much of the music here. But Dresden was so important to Bach. Maybe you could just speak about the importance and how that relates to the composition of B minor Mass.
Sure. Bach seemed to have a certain envy for the big city. He traveled to north to Hamburg when he was a young composer. He later traveled to Dresden and Berlin. He seemed to have big city envy, even though he had spent much of his time in backwoods Thuringia and Saxony. Leipzig wasn't exactly backwoods with the annual fairs, but nevertheless it wasn't Dresden or it wasn't Berlin. And so he looked to these cities for musical enrichment and also musical stimulus, cultural stimulus. And certainly for him, Dresden held much allure. The Saxon elector resided there, and he applied for the job of titular composer in 1733, and the assembling of the Missa gave him the opportunity to open doors there. It was also a style that he had not explored in great depth before. And then also he could tap into the virtuoso ensemble, which he cited in 1730 with great envy, that these instrumentalists only have to focus on one instrument. They don't have to be generalists the way they are here in Leipzig.
Right, yeah. So that enabled him to write some music that we hear in the Mass, perhaps, that he could not have written if he were just writing for the boys and the men that would be performing here, that he was really thinking of some particular musicians in Leipzig, possibly.
In Dresden, we think so.
In Dresden.
We think so, for the Missa.
Yeah.
I mean, some of those pieces are very showy. The arias are showcase arias with virtuoso instrumental parts and vocal parts, and you find those in the Leipzig cantatas, of course, but it does seem to be an extraordinary concentration of demanding pieces in the Missa, the Kyrie and the Gloria section in particular.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly think that Bach could expect an even better and more satisfying performance of his vocal music from the Dresden ensembles. But it's certainly the case that, I mean, I think my colleagues would back me up on this, that every bar of the Mass in B minor, there's no reason why it couldn't have been rendered in Leipzig, even if it weren't as well done as it would have been in Dresden. And certainly there are other pieces like the Magnificat, which also is for 5-voice chorus and appears to have been written for Leipzig originally when it was in E-flat major, and the more famous D major version of it seems to have some sort of connections with Dresden, so that there's no conflict, so to speak, between Dresden and Leipzig. It's just that, as you say, Dresden is even better.
A stimulus.
A stimulus,
A stimulus.
Yeah.
It seemed to, Bach he moved around quite a bit, even though it was in a relatively small area. He was often dissatisfied with his location and wanted to go to a bigger venue or a venue that offered more opportunities. And we know that he battled quite a bit with the Leipzig Town Council, and he even, in writing to the Elixir, said how dissatisfied he was being in Leipzig. Is it possible that if things were really happy for him here, he was really satisfied in Leipzig and didn't feel the need to apply for the court position, would he not have even written the Mass in B minor? Is that conceivable, that he only wrote it because he wanted to get that position?
Yeah, if he had been happy in Leipzig, he would have simply written a long series of collegium cantatas instead. Bach seemed to be eternally dissatisfied with his positions. I mean, Peter knows his biography much better than I, but if you look back over his history, he left Arnstadt, then he goes to Mühlhausen for less than 2 years, then he goes to Weimar, then he applies for a job in Halle because he doesn't like the conditions or wants to up the ante in Weimar. Then he leaves Weimar, he goes to Curtin, where he claims to have been the happiest in his life, but he nevertheless applies for a job in Hamburg as organist in 1720. Then he comes to Leipzig, he's here 7 years, and then writes his school buddy, Georg Erdmann, looking for a possible job elsewhere. I mean, where, really? And then finally he applies for this titular position in Dresden. But I think it's more than dissatisfaction with position with the B minor Mass. I think it's stylistic restlessness. That Bach's continually looking for a new style, for new avenues to explore, and a missa toda, that is a complete Mass ordinary, was something he hadn't looked at before. So I think we'd have it no matter what.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I agree, but of course we don't know what would have happened if Bach didn't have the opportunity in Dresden. But I think we can be certain that no matter what the external circumstances are, that he was always looking for a challenge as a composer. And for me, it is clear, well, he came to Leipzig, started with the very demanding task of writing these cantata cycles. First cycle within a year, second cycle within a year, and then the third cycle within 2.5 years. It's a logical development that afterwards, after he had shown to his audience and also perhaps to himself that he was able to do that, to write an annual cycle of first-rank pieces for every Sunday of the church year, to go to find different challenges. He started with the Passions, the oratorios, Christmas oratorio then, and a piece like the B minor Mass in 1730, well, the Missa, Kyrie and Gloria, I should say, in 1733, fits in so well with what he did anyway, that no matter what the external circumstances are, he would have found a way to challenge himself as a composer. And just to add this, what he wanted from Dresden was not a position there. He just was asking for a title that he could carry, and that would give his to make his position here in Leipzig stronger. He probably didn't think about moving to Dresden.
He's also a composer who moves on. I mean, he does something like the Orgelbuchlein, then he moves on to a different genre, or he writes the violin sonatas and partitas, then he moves on. So now he writes the cantatas, he moves on. And the Mass would seem to fit into that pattern.
Yeah.